you've been able to maintain super host status even after 700 plus reviews, and you've been named top quality in the US for 50 plus properties. How have you done that?
That was the biggest thing. We knew in order to grow, be successful, and be an industry leader, the most challenging part when it comes to the client relationship is the expectation.
We did an analysis and found out that there was a strong correlation between the flexibility profile of an owner in terms of pricing and how much we would be able to outperform their market.
And nothing is more black and white than data. Your visibility is based on a whole bunch of factors that just changed again. It makes it almost impossible for a single operator to get visibility.
Would it make more sense to continue adding more economies of scale to the market where you already have a presence versus opening up a new market?
That's probably the hardest part, especially for a manager.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring what we think are two sides of the same coin together, real estate and hospitality, and we interview operators, property managers, and entrepreneurs so that they tell us about the lessons they've learned along the way, the mistakes they've made, and what they've learned from them so you don't have to make those same mistakes. Today, I'm excited to have Ric Kenworthy, the co-owner and CEO of Travli Hospitality with us. So Ric, thank you very much for taking the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Ric, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into hospitality, entrepreneurship, and kind of your journey all the way to where you're at today?
So I think we probably took a similar path as some. We wanted to get into the investing world from a real estate perspective. 8 years ago, my wife and I moved here from Seattle, my wife from Omaha, and we both had six-figure W-2 jobs that we were doing. And we looked into real estate investing as an opportunity to make a little bit extra money and obviously diversify our investment portfolio. We bought a couple of condos, one that almost bankrupted us actually, that we put up way back when, and Airbnb was relatively easy. It was a relatively inexpensive condo, but went through kind of the ups and downs of a contractor relationship and getting it up and running. But once we finally did, it actually took off. Back then, Airbnb in Scottsdale, I think, was relatively easy. And shortly thereafter, we saw the opportunity and we went ahead and parlayed the money that we had made in one of our small condos into another one. And then from there, we actually sold the first one and parlayed that into a single family home. So we had 2 properties of our own. We were managing those. We had a guest that came and stayed that comes regularly, the car collector, and he frequented Barrett Jackson. So he stayed in one of our condos and based on the amount of time he spends in Scottsdale, he made a comment to us that maybe he should buy something and if it was close to ours, would we manage it? And we said, sure. And that's kind of where it started. And then I had a friend from Seattle that saw what we were doing just through social media and whatnot. And he said, hey, I got a property that Turnkey's managing in Phoenix that's struggling. Would you help me out? And so we brought that one on, and that was 4 properties. And we kind of just grew organically from there, just word of mouth. We didn't quite take it seriously. And at that point, we were kind of doing it as a side hustle. We both worked 50, 60 hours a week at our day jobs and did this on the side. And it got to be a little cumbersome, just like I'm sure others experienced as far as late night lockouts and issues with cleaners and everything that everybody's probably experienced along the way. And then the summer of 2020, we decided at that point we had 9 properties. We decided it was a real business. Like I said, we grew organically, word of mouth, through referrals. We had 9 properties at that point in time. And at that point, we decided there was a real business there. And I stepped out of what I knew for 21 years, which was corporate cars, and stepped into the short-term rental management world. And that was August of 2020. And my wife followed shortly thereafter, a couple of months after. And from there, today we have 90. So it's been a pretty interesting ride.
So from 9 properties to 90 properties in 4 years. What was that moment like when you decided that this was a real business? Like what triggered it? And was it a difficult personal decision or was it just a no-brainer? You knew that was what had to be done. Tell me about that transition from you being on the side hustle side of things versus moving on to taking this as a serious business.
I mean, there was a lot of fear, obviously, coming from something that's pretty pretty regular as far as income. We saw the opportunity. We had some decent properties at the time. We were making pretty good money. It definitely wasn't to the level that we had experienced in our W-2 job, but it was something that I worked so many hours in corporate cars that it kind of just made sense to go that direction. I was getting burned out. 21 years in cars will take a toll on you. And I actually had a little bit of a falling out with the management that I was working with at the time. And my wife fully supported me and said, "What, it's just time. Why don't you jump into both feet and see what we can do and see if we can build this thing up?" And I mean, again, it was pretty scary because, again, there's no guarantees in that world, but it ended up working out pretty well. We started growing almost instantly and decided that the same thing would reign true if she came on to help with the operations. And like I said, a couple of months later, she quit multiple years in nursing and jumped in with me. And at that time, we were Old Town Rental, and that's kind of where it all kind of came to fruition, and it just started growing organically from there. But it was definitely a scary transition. But I think it was a mixture of having to deal with things while I was trying to do my day job. Obviously, I had to handle most of the operations because in nursing, she wouldn't have time to take a guest phone call or something like that. It kind of just started to interfere a little bit. It wasn't the reason I had a falling out with management, but it was at that point when it was trying to juggle both sides of it. It's like, okay, you got to make a commitment to one or the other. And it turned out to make a commitment to entrepreneurship and growing the company.
Had this been the first time you had launched something like from the ground up as far as like entrepreneurship goes?
I opened a restaurant quite a few years back and failed miserably, I guess. So that was part of the scare factor in it. I knew I had the ability to do it. The failure of the restaurant was just because of a way more challenging industry, but not entirely things under my control. And I took a stab at entrepreneurship. It didn't really go the way that we had expected or that I expected it, but it kind of left a taste in my mouth where I had unfinished business when the opportunity came again. And so it made it that much more important to turn this into something that would be a success.
And what would you say to someone that might be listening to this and your story resonates with them as far as like they're doing it as a side hustle right now? They know they should probably commit to something and it should probably be this, but they're still having that fear factor from previous failures or whatnot. What would you tell someone that's kind of in that same position that you would recommend as far as advice?
I mean, I think that you can look at whatever it is that you're doing in the moment. Like we looked at it before. I'm relatively analytical, and my wife is a little bit more matter of fact, but obviously had faith in me. And I looked at all facets of it. I mean, we were performing very well. We looked at the numbers that you can look as far as metrics, obviously with Airbnb, Superho status, and obviously income to figure out whether or not we could survive on it if it plateaued. But at the end of the day, there's some very easy metrics, and that's if you're maintaining a Superho status and you're making money. I mean, obviously that's kind of the granular level of it all. But at the same time, if you look in the mirror and you feel like it's something that you're passionate about, obviously opening a restaurant, it was kind of in a hospitality aspect under entirely different industry. But I've kind of always had a knack for hospitality in one way or another. And so it just was a matter of just looking in the mirror and saying, hey, it's something that I'm passionate about. And it turned out we were doing a very good job. We were very highly rated and we were making money. So at the end of the day, it just made sense to make the jump. It certainly was a little bit of an unknown because at the moment when you have 9 properties, it definitely doesn't circumvent 2 6-figure incomes, but we took a leap of faith in it and it worked out for the best. But I guess from an advice perspective, if you're good at it and you're passionate about it, then there's no reason not to try it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess also like analytically running the numbers and saying, hey, okay, perfect. I'm going to quit my job. This is where I need to be at to replace that W-2 income that I had is probably the approach you took. Now, how do you go about growing? Like, how did you go about growing, and what do you think allowed you to be successful at scaling so fast in the last few years?
In the initial phases, it was again, to go from the two that we owned and then one that a client bought, a lot of it was word of mouth. We never really thought about marketing or anything like that. And so once we decided that it was the path we were going to take, then came the marketing aspect of it. And back then it was relatively primitive. I'd say that it was only a handful of years ago, but we started marketing a little bit more. We had a website built. We put a little bit more effort into our brand. And at the old time, back then it was Old Town Rental. And we started just to build up a bit of a reputation. Like I was very vocal in a lot of the advocacy groups. I was very vocal on some of the Facebook groups. We have a Facebook group here in Scottsdale that's 25,000 members where people go to get information. I was very much helpful from a mentor perspective with up and coming hosts or individual operators. And so after a while, it just kind of became a situation where I was in the public eye, I guess, from in this industry in every avenue that I could be and trying to be as helpful as possible. So people started to kind of that resonate with people if they were in real estate. Real estate's a big one. I have a handful of colleagues that are in real estate that the boom of short-term rental brought a lot of investors in that space. And so being close with the realtors that are selling it made it a pretty easy transition into being a management for those buyers. And so I think the biggest thing was our relationship in the real estate field, from the purchases that we made or a referral of people that might have organically come through our website that were interested in short-term rental, didn't necessarily know where to go. We would connect them with real estate agents, a couple that we work closely with, and then that would naturally translate into a management relationship on the backside of it. So that was the biggest thing, is our relationship with realtors. And then obviously being very much involved in a number of advocacy groups, and then being very vocal when it comes to the social media platforms that are out there that kind of revolve around this industry, at least here in Arizona.
And would you say there's something you did particularly right when it comes to your, I don't know, maybe your referral program with brokers or with real estate agents, about the way you structured that? Or was it really just the relationships aspect mainly?
So in the beginning, it was more about the relationship. As we've grown, and one of the biggest things that happened for us was we decided that we kind of niched ourselves into our own little cozy market here in Old Town Scottsdale with the name Old Town Rental. And so a little over a year and a half ago, we decided that we were going to grow beyond obviously Old Town. So somebody wanted accommodations in Northern Arizona or Glendale or somewhere else, and we send our domain, oldtownrental.com. They would look at that and be like, well, what if I don't want to stay in Old Town? And so kind of we made a decision together that it was time to go through a rebranding process and be something that as we grow, if we decided we wanted to grow out of Old Town Scottsdale, which clearly we have, we would need obviously a name and a brand that was a little bit more open to other areas. And so we launched Travli Hospitality a year and a half ago. And once we did that, that was when it really became important for not only a referral network situation as far as an actual processes for referrals, but some sort of an I scratch your back, you scratch mine scenario. And so we do have a referral program. It's probably one of the best in the industry. We grade properties based on their potential, and then we have a graduated scale. We obviously had the luxury of being a little bit more selective lately, but we used to have a 3, 4, and 5-star scale for properties, and we would pay accordingly as far as a referral bonus. So if a realtor wanted to bring us a potential client and we came together on a deal for management, then we would pay a referral fee up front and then another one X amount of months later after they've been contracted with us. So that's been a pretty successful venture also. And that's more so lately. I mean, we've been hovering around 90 properties just simply because we've been a little bit more selective in our processes. We don't take just anything. Obviously, we want something that kind of fits the trajectory of what we're trying to do from an aesthetic standpoint. And obviously, that's super important in this market, as competitive as it is. But yes, the referral program has been a huge boost for us.
And you said that you think it's one of the best out there. What exactly do you think is unique about it in terms of the way you structured it? I mean, you talked about the grading system approach of it. Like, I guess it's based on the revenue potential of the property that you assign it a certain rating. You mentioned the structure of like paying a certain amount up front and a certain amount afterwards, after perhaps a few months of the property having been live and whatnot. What are sort of some of the changes you've made to this program along the way that has led you to where it is
Well,
now?
one of the biggest things we wanted, you can't just walk into a real estate brokerage and say, hey, we want to be your short-term rental partner. You have to, obviously, we've changed our focus a little bit. We're more on the luxury end as far as what we onboard currently, but luxury doesn't necessarily mean $5 million. You could have a six or $700,000 or $100,000 house that still fits kind of the luxe or higher end aesthetic. And what we did, we launched ourselves with a mixer where we invited a bunch of real estate agents, and we wanted them to understand that, especially in the luxury real estate world, that they give their clients kind of this white glove approach to the purchase and or sale of real estate. And we wanted to make sure that they understood on the other side of that is if they give them this white glove service, and then they have to hand it off to a referral for the next phase, which potentially the staging or setup or management or all of the above, that they continue to get that same white glove service. So there'd be nothing worse than offering a high level of service to a potential real estate client and take them all the way through the process to completion as far as closing on a property, and then hand them off to somebody that you're not certain is going to take the same level of care. And so we kind of introduced ourselves in the form of a real estate mixer at one of our luxury properties so that people would have an opportunity to get to know us personally, but also get to know our staff, get to know our company, understand a little bit more about kind of the logistical side, what we do differently than most, not just the money. Obviously, the money side of it is important because if they want to have, again, the kind of the eye scratch your back, you scratch mine. We work with a couple of core people when it comes to the acquisition side, but we have a ton of partners from the management side. So it's just about offering the same level of service that the real estate agent offered throughout the process and keeping it at that high level and making sure that they're going to be in good hands once that purchase is made and it's handed off for potential management.
Makes sense. Now, you've talked about becoming more selective with the owners that you accept and perhaps even keep within the program. What's been the hardest part about doing that, and how have you gone about tackling this?
I think the most challenging part when it comes to that client relationship is just the expectation. So you have to make sure that you create a realistic expectation. I can't remember which of my colleagues I was talking with, but if you can't, you have to be able to explain to a client that it's not just about kind of that initial ether of the launch and the staging and all the fun stuff that comes with it. You have to create a realistic expectation when it comes to the long-term success. So, example, right now, it's the summertime. And obviously revenues are down. We're actually having a really good summer in comparison to previous summers. But at the end of the day, Arizona is very, very hard on exterior amenities when it comes to outdoor furniture and things like that. And going back to the owners and saying, hey, it's been 2 years, the life expectancy of some of your aesthetically pleasing areas, like your outdoor furniture and the way that your outdoor areas are set up, it's time for a refresh. And so that's probably the biggest challenge is obviously we try to be a little bit more strategic in our timing, but you can't control when things just kind of fall apart. And so I think that's the biggest challenge is just making sure. And when I say the biggest challenge, previously, we're a little bit more transparent than we probably ever have been in a positive way, but being transparent in the aspects of what the expectation is long term. So if this is everybody's about the instant gratification, I want to see the numbers you promised up front. I want to see the first year successful. I want a cash flow. I want this, that, and the next. But at the end of the day, setting a clear understanding of what it's going to take to maintain that over 1, 3, 5, 10 years. I think that transparency is ultimately the key. And then obviously transparency about the changes in legislation, the changes in saturation, the changes in seasonality. There's a lot of things that it can go sour really quick with a manager, with a client as a manager, if you're not transparent about the expectation. Hey, during January, February, March in Arizona, you should escrow some money so that you're not struggling or going statement to statement in June, July, and August. Setting a clear expectation, I think, is the biggest and most crucial part to being a successful short-term rental manager. is so you don't have those hurdles when it comes June, July, August, and you have to a client and say, hey, I need $1,000 to replace your loungers. They're falling apart because they've been cooked, or whatever it may happen to be. But just setting a clear expectation, being transparent about what it really takes to have that long-term success is probably one of the most important things.
That's very true. And I was watching a video the other day that talked about completely like side topic, but related as well. It talked about how CMOs at companies tend to last very short periods compared to other C-suite roles. And so it was a video that was sort of analyzing why is that the case? Why is it that CMOs, chief marketing officers, don't last that long in companies? And one of the things that it came down to was basically just the lack of conversations that take place around budget of like, okay, I'm going to come in and perfect, this is going to be my salary, but this is the budget I need for the first year or the first 6 months, and then year 1 and year 2. So what you're saying right there is kind of similar, as in like, hey, it's great that you're willing to pay my management commission. That's a good start, but these are the investments that are going to be required to be made in your property in year 1, in year 2, and this is where you can expect, and this is when you can expect me to come to you and say, hey, we need to upgrade this furniture. Right. I don't think a lot of people have those conversations.
That's probably the hardest part, especially for someone aspiring to be a manager. Let's just say they're at the place where we were with 9 properties. That was a conversation that was very much causes anxiety in the beginning when you're still kind of getting your bearings. But at the end of the day, they're going to appreciate it in the long run, because let's face it, I mean, there's too many situations, and we see it every single day. I have people that come to us from other management companies every day, and their reviews start to slip, their revenues start to slip. They're battling because, I mean, let's face it, once you drop below a certain area in the way that you're reviewed on Airbnb, your visibility just drops. And the issue is that obviously when you launch a new listing, you put your best foot forward, brand new pictures, everything's brand new, all your furniture is brand new. Maintaining that, on the other hand, is challenging, especially in Arizona. After a couple of summers, monsoon, the heat, all of these things, I mean, it just does a number on your number one area for this market in general. But your outdoor areas are critical. Your pool, your outdoor amenities are probably at the forefront, keeping that stuff intact. You're going to run into a challenge. But that was one of the more challenging things for us, is when we were in a situation where we needed our clients more than they needed us, because we were still growing and trying to replace that income that we had from our day job. Those were hard conversations to have. Now it's, you set a clear expectation up front, say, hey, the life expectancy of outdoor furniture in Scottsdale is about 2 summers. And as long as they know that, the conversation's coming. But we're also very transparent in keeping up with newsletters and things that don't just go out to our guests, they also go out to our clients. So they are up to date on your compliance, they're up to date on the issues that are facing, challenges other managers are facing as far as challenges. And that transparency is the most critical part of the client relationship, for sure. And that's a hard conversation for a lot to have, especially when you go through a June, July, and August where your income is just off. I mean, that's the seasonality of Arizona. So you have to have that conversation in August with the client, and it's time to spend $1,500 or $2,000 to bring their property back up to par going into the busier season. For a lot of managers, that's probably the hardest conversation to have. But if you set the expectation up front, it's a heck of a lot easier, makes things go a lot smoother.
Absolutely. And talking about expectation management, one thing that we hear a lot, we at Angel Host work with property managers around the world on the revenue management side of things. But one of the challenges when it comes to that is the expectations that the owners might have with rates, right? Where they come in thinking that they shouldn't be booked for less than this amount ever. And then you're on the other side trying to educate them on the importance. And we actually did an analysis, and we found out that there was a strong correlation between the flexibility profile of an owner in terms of pricing and how much we would be able to outperform their market in terms of a RevPAR index, our RevPAR versus the comp set. how have you approached that aspect of expectation management when it comes to pricing? Because I know you're overseeing that at the moment as well.
Usually data. I mean, depending on the client. I mean, we have a spectrum. I mean, we have clients that are peer investors that aren't necessarily concerned with floor rates or anything other than put as many people as you can, make as much money as you can at the end of the day. Don't call me much, but you have to. And then there's clients that maybe lived in their property for half their life and they've upgraded or moved in with a significant other and decided to try and make some income off their property and have a little bit more of a sentimental kind of attachment to it. But I mean, nothing is more kind of black and white than data. So obviously there's a number of sources for data. I mean, I'm assuming most being one of those where you can say, I mean, you can drill down the data. Here's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house, an 85254. This has similar amenities on a similar level as far as quality. And this is what the numbers are. I mean, there's plenty of platforms out there that provide it. And that's a pretty black and white conversation. Here's what your expectation is. Here's what the reality is. Now, in a lot of cases, we are able to operate on the higher end of some of those. We're close to 7,000 reviews, I think, and we've maintained our superhost status. And we're recently recognized by AirDNA for management companies over 50 doors. I think we're number one in the state when it comes to guest satisfaction, which is critical. But all of the new algorithms and everything else that comes from Airbnb is all your visibility is based on a whole bunch of factors that just changed again recently with the introduction of the trophy system with Airbnb and a few other things. But it makes it almost impossible for a single operator, even with a very well set up, well managed property. It makes it almost impossible for them to get visibility. We always talk about first 5. We have a board here where there's a person with listing all of our property that show up on the first 5 from a different number of different metrics. And if we don't have 8, 10, 12 properties for each area that show up on the first 5, then we go back and start tinkering. But that's a big part of the value when it comes to nightly rate. You also have to be proactive. One of the reasons that we're having such a good year this year is we're not going to go into a fire sale posture on any of our properties. It's just not our business model. But we have some programs that we use right now for pricing that we use historical pacing. So we can look at, okay, what did this property do the last 2 summers on these exact dates? And we can make adjustments from there and set up our pricing software, which I'm active in almost every day, set up our pricing software to make adjustments based on historical pathing. So obviously somebody or seeing the rates that it booked for previously 1 year, 2 years, 3 years ago, and then coming up with a formula internally that we feel is fair, but getting ahead of that and knowing what your historical pacing looks like gives you an opportunity to look far enough ahead, because this year we beat our summer occupancy years from June and all of July by almost 10% from last year. And that's because we got way ahead of our pricing. We know historically where they're gonna book and the prices they're gonna book at, and we set our historical pacing 10 or 12% above that, and gives us about a 10 or 12% cushion for our staff and the communications department to make deals. People ask for special offers, which is way more prevalent than it's ever been before. I think people are starting to learn that you don't get it if you don't ask. And we probably 30% of our inquiries come through with a request for a discount of some sort. And so we've set it up to where our communication agents have that cushion of 10 or 12 or 15% to where it's still not going to book for less than it had previously. And so we did that farther in advance, and rather than waiting at the 30, 60, 90-day intervals for price drops, we started that way farther in advance. And I mean, it's translated to better occupancy that we've seen in a couple of years for the summertime. So and then obviously being, again, transparent with your clients, we send out a newsletter. Hey, here's what the market is. Here's AirDNA. Here's Wheelhouse. Here's Beyond Pricing. Here's what everybody is saying. There's different properties in different arenas are renting for. You always get the clients, it's like, oh, well, here's 2 options that are right near me that are twice as much money. Well, you wouldn't see them if they're still available because they're not priced correctly. You wouldn't see them if they're booked. So just kind of creating that data transparency on the way that it's supposed to be, and then just building trust. We have clients that they trust in the process. It's only nuance that you kind of have to earn their trust, and usually that comes with data. And I mean, data doesn't lie. Here's what the properties are renting for. Here's the occupancy that you can expect. Here's where we should be from a pricing perspective, and it gives us a little room to move one way or another. But typically, you can always go down, you can't go back up. So just being transparent, being ahead of it, having the right tech stack to make sure that you're seeing the trends really before they happen will help in the long run. But again, transparency. The question, I guess, was how do you have that conversation with clients? They all think their property should rent for more. They all have some idea of what it should be because everybody has access to the same things that we do. And they think they put an area, maybe they don't quite tweak it the right way, and they see this number that's not realistic. But data is king in that situation. I think obviously a couple of different data points. And for us, we have our own internal data. So it's easy for somebody coming into our portfolio or considering joining our portfolio to find 3 or 4 properties that are very similar. When you get a portfolio that's big enough, you have a lot of data points that you can reflect on that are your own, rather than trusting what you see online. We have actual real data on properties that are similar. So sharing that and being transparent about the expectation is pretty important. So usually works okay. But again, you're always going to have a client that says, well, it just kind of is what it is. And we have to do those.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that what property managers sometimes don't realize, going back to the types of owners that exist, is you described it perfectly. There's the owner that's going to be an investor, and they're going to be all about revenue maximization. And then there's the owner that's going to be more of a second home type of homeowner, where they're emotionally attached to the property. And it's understanding that as a property management company, if you're charging a commission, if you're charging a variable fee, you are making money so long as the property is getting booked, right? And you can get a property that has all the potential in the world, but where you don't get pricing flexibility, and thus you don't book the property. And it can literally be the difference between making or losing money as a property management company if you run your unit economics and run your numbers. So I think it's crucial what you said there on trust and data enabled recommendations. Not just say, hey, this is what I think, but this is what the market is telling us. Now, you mentioned that you've been able to maintain super host status even after 700 plus reviews, and you've been named top quality in the US for 50 plus properties operators. How have you done that? How have you achieved that level of quality?
Attention to detail, probably. I mean, it's very easy when it comes to tech to kind of take the set it and forget it stance, I think, on a lot of things. And once you get to a point, let's just, for an example, as an independent operator, once you get 50 or 60 reviews, 1 4-star review is not going to ruin you. We hold ourselves to a pretty high standard. In fact, there's a board downstairs where everybody walks by every single day, and it changes every single day how many days of perfection. So, I mean, for us, without trying to gloat, we only really are competing with ourselves. You run metrics for Airbnb, and at a certain level, you have an Airbnb market manager, and you sign a bunch of NDAs and go through this big, long process to get this different level of data that most people don't see. Any small operator will have an account manager, but once you get to the level of, I don't know how much money it has to be before they assign you a market manager, you go through about a 2-month process of vetting and NDAs and everything, and they can provide you with a lot of high-level data that you don't see otherwise. And it's extremely helpful when you're looking at your comparison against everybody else that's operating in your area. And so our attention to detail, like I said, we more or less compete with ourselves, because to me, at 4.91 or 4.92, that's well into the superhost status, and close to 7,000 reviews. It would take hundreds of 1-star reviews to take out of that realm. But we spend the money when it comes to that quality control aspect, because at the end of the day, the guest is the one that's going to submit the review. And if the guests aren't happy, you got to try to make them happy, and having resources from a management perspective to do that. We had a situation for the first handful of years operating as a real business, not our side hustle. When we decided as a real business, we had vendors for everything. We had vendors for a large part of our pool and landscape maintenance services. A lot of the things that are kind of guest forward, pool especially, we had to vendor out probably 50% of our cleanings, just because we only had a couple of girls that we worked with that did a really good job. And then we had to vendor out to a couple small companies for that.
Mm-hmm.
And about, I think, the 30 property mark. And after a couple of years of, God, I think I must have fired 6 pool companies. I just started my own. We hired a couple of guys that had a lot of experience with pools and paid them a lot more money than they would make getting paid by the pool. We paid them by the hour so that they took the time and attention to details. Then we did the same thing with our cleaning staff. We brought it all in-house so that we could vet them ourselves and so that we controlled both aspects of it. And if you are vendoring out pool services and your pool gets serviced on a Tuesday and a monsoon comes through on a Wednesday and you've got to check in on a Friday, and your pool company is buried in trying to stay on top of the pools they already have scheduled, and you're paying X amount of money to get an emergency service done or not getting one done at all, and then sending somebody, myself included, out to try to get a pool right before somebody checks in, that's a huge knock on your quality when it comes to the guest perspective. And so having all of those services in the house for us is kind of an unfair advantage. We control all of it. So if there's our pools are all serviced twice a week, we have our own cleaning staff that will go back out if it's not right. Our pool guys will go back out if it's not right. Every aspect of it is under our control. And so it makes it a heck of a lot easier than trying to explain away that you can't get a pool guy out because it's the weekend and a monsoon season and they're slammed and they may not have use of the pool for their entire stay. That's a big problem, especially this time of the year. So having all of those resources internally is the biggest part of how that's been able to be maintained, because we control all of it. You have a cleaning vendor that whatever happens if they don't show up or they do a bad job and they can't go back out, or any number of things that can really hurt your guest's perception of the quality that you're offering. And that could kill you. If you've only got 6 or 8 reviews and you get a 2 or a 3, that will take you out of what Airbnb considers acceptable from a visibility standpoint. So as soon as you drop below 4.8, you may as well be 0. I mean, it's not that extreme, but from a visibility aspect, Airbnb features the properties that make them the most money first. The ones that are the most active, the ones that are the highest rated, the ones that are the most wish listed, the ones that are saved the most often. And if people are scrolling through and they see 6, 8, 10, 12 properties that are 4.8, 4.9, and then one that's 4.5, I mean, they just keep going. So it's absolutely critical. And we make it probably the most important thing in our entire business is that we maintain that. All of our automations post-checkout are all about the experience and trying to make sure that we address anything that might have made it less than a 5-star stay up front. And then having the right team to also kind of maneuver through issues during their stay. If a group comes and they blow a fuse and they're not comfortable messing with the fuse box, and you got to call a handyman or electrician and they can't get out there for a day or 2. I mean, they're few and far between. That's an issue. Or again, the pool situation or any number of things. If you don't have the resources to handle those efficiently, then you're just stuck, and it just creates a bad scenario and not a 5-star stay from a guest perspective. And so having those tools internally is probably what we attribute our ratings to the most, is being able to control every aspect of it. It's critical.
And then one thing is having the team internally. Another is making sure that they have the same expectations or the same standards of what's considered to be good enough, right? So you've mentioned the leaderboard that you have where you say how many days we've had with perfection, right, in terms of ratings. What other things like that have you implemented internally to make sure that your team has that same mindset of setting the bar very high in terms of what's required?
That's a tough question, because it's not, if you don't come to us from a short-term rental background, it's hard to impose that kind of thought process on somebody that's just learning the short-term rental world. Maybe they have customer service experience, maybe they have hospitality experience, but if they don't have a short-term rental experience, but we go through a pretty, I don't want to say rigorous, but a pretty in-depth kind of training process. And we've got, I mean, obviously from doing it as long as we've been doing it, we've seen just about every situation that could come up. And so we have a standard operating procedure or guidebook for our communications people, especially brand new, that says basically you encounter this, you do this. If one of these three things happens from there, then you do this. And we try to make sure that it's consistent. Consistency is a big part of it. If three different people are saying three different things to the same guest, because let's face it, we have different shifts. There's different people dealing with people. If you stay for a week, you might talk to all three of our communications agents at one point in time or another, but it's just taking a background in customer satisfaction or customer service and just tweaking it for the short-term rental industry. And a lot of that just takes time and experience. You can't necessarily teach how to strategically walk somebody through a situation they might not be comfortable with, or a situation that comes up from a maintenance perspective, or any number of things, but empowering them to learn it, and then empowering them enough to make their own decisions throughout the process with some core training gives them kind of our SOPs as far as how things need to be handled. And then polishing that as they grow with us is a big part of it as well. So just having a core hospitality mind is first and foremost, and then obviously customer service comes with that. Making sure that you're talking with a smile on your face, because that translates. And then obviously, just even if you don't agree, or even if you don't, I'm the worst. I did our communications for a really long time, and it got so tedious for me that I'd be the first one to say that I've handed it off to nicer people. But you get frustrated in some cases, like, God, it would be easier to be like, we're never going to make this person happy. Let's just have them go somewhere else. But that's why I've hired and empowered people that are a lot more patient, I think, than I am. Obviously, the delegation of communication was one of the first things that we did, but putting it in the hands of the right people is pretty important. On the ones that are compassionate to the situation and are willing to walk people through it. I mean, you read our reviews on Google, and they'll call people out by name for helping them through specific issues efficiently. And I think that the efficiency is probably the key component of that.
Got it. Now, let's talk about the steps that you've gone through as a founder CEO in terms of when you're first starting out. You mentioned it just now, you were doing everything, including guest communications, right? But then as you start to grow, you start to be able to delegate certain things and start focusing on other areas. So what's been the journey of you as a CEO? How has that evolved in terms of where you spend most of your time? And what does that look like today?
I mean, yeah, in the beginning, between my wife and I, and mostly me when it came to, obviously the logistics part of it, she was very supportive in a lot of other ways. But when I'm having to leave at 1:00 in the morning to go let somebody in that got locked out, I did everything. The first thing that we brought in, the first person that we hired was kind of an all-in-one communications person, so that it didn't fall on my shoulders 24/7. Obviously, it was at a relatively limited scale in the beginning. But then at that point, we knew, I think we hired our first person at 12 or 15 properties. And then at that point, we had grown from 9 to 15 in a very short amount of time. And we knew where our trajectory was. And so we started kind of strategically hiring from there. The first phase of that was communication. And then the second phase of that was to bring our housekeeping in-house. We didn't have enough properties to where it was super cumbersome, but I think we had a group of 3 really good cleaners that came to us as a referral. We kind of leaned on them quite a bit in the beginning, and then we kind of just grew our team strategically as needed, I guess. I think then we hired a maintenance technician who was trying to help keep up on pools. And then, like I said, we started our own pool company. So we went from me doing everything to me slowly releasing certain parts of it. And obviously, when you're building something as an entrepreneur, it's kind of your baby. There's a lot of anxiety in handing off things that you feel like you've got down to somebody else, and then trusting in that person to at some level walk away and trust it's being handled effectively. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges growing as a CEO is exactly that, is the choosing the right person to delegate, and then trusting in that person in the way that you've trained them that they're going to do it the way that you would. And as we've grown and hired more people, it gets easier every single time. Now we're in the process of a potential merger that would bring in somebody that has some experience on a pretty high level, not nearly as many properties, but from the logistical part where I come from. And now we're looking at adding a general manager into our mix that will make things even that much easier for me as a CEO. There are still some components I just don't let go of quite yet. And that's a big part of that is the initial onboarding and the client consultation and the pricing strategy. Just a lot of it comes from gut. A lot of it comes from experience. And so those are the last two things that I'm still hanging on to is the client acquisition side and the overall pricing. Everything else has been pretty well delegated, and my team does a really good job on every aspect. I'll stick my nose in sometimes just to make sure that they know that I'm still privy to what's going on. But for the most part, that's a very challenging part for a CEO as you grow in your company is that first person you're delegating a percentage of your tasks to, and then that second person that gets another percentage. And pretty soon your 100% is down in the 20-25% range. And a little bit of anxiety in that. But once you're comfortable with it and the people are doing what they're supposed to do, it makes things a lot more comfortable. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of where you guys are heading now, you had mentioned to me that there was a big expansion coming ahead, national expansion. So how do you think through that in terms of would it make more sense to just continue adding more economies of scale to the market that where you already have a presence versus opening up a new market? When does that make sense versus when should you continue just consolidating more volume to spread those costs on a larger property base? Like what are your thoughts on expansion at this point?
You kind of have to just decide where you're trying to go. I mean, it's very comfortable. Obviously, expanding in Arizona is very comfortable. We know the market, we know the seasonality, we know every little aspect of it. The seasonality of Arizona makes it challenging. You want to make sure one of the things that, and every Arizona host will tell you the same thing. I mean, you buckle up coming through at the end of May. The June, July, and August are going to be tough. It doesn't matter how good you think you are, how much occupancy you have, or whatever the case. No matter how you cut it, you're going to take a 40 or 50% hit to your monthly revenue during those months. And so that was a big part of the decision-making process for expansion, is to be able to potentially be in other markets that have cross seasonality where the summer is their busy season. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the deciding factor. Clearly, after doing this for 8 years, we know it's coming. So it's not like it's a secret, and we prepare and it's not nearly as painful for us as it may be for others, but it's still a significant issue with being operating in only Arizona. And we have not slowed our expansion in Arizona. We're in the process of onboarding heavily right now because I think the summertime is when people start to really micro analyze their current management. So we get a lot of inquiries in the summertime, but it just made sense from a fiscal perspective to start looking at least one or multiple other markets, because let's face it, 90 properties in Scottsdale, we would have to have a similar portfolio in other markets where the summer is the busy season in order to offset it, to give us a more consistent kind of revenue stream. And so that came with, we've had inquiries to potentially be in other markets. It's a challenge opening up in another market logistically to have a staff and dedicated people, and the things that we have here in Arizona would require a certain size of portfolio from the start in another market. Mm-hmm. And I can't divulge too much, but we are in the process of the expansion into Southern California. I think that's a great market for cross seasonality. I just got back from some kind of fact finding and some partnership meetings in St. Petersburg, Florida. We have an opportunity in Lake of the Ozarks and a few other areas that we're looking at, but it just has to make sense. But there's a lot of logistics to go into it. But at the end of the day, Scottsdale being as competitive as it is, and I think that if you can survive or excel or prosper in this market with this amount of saturation and this amount of competition, I think that translates to being able to put your business in a box and open that box in the market and be successful. I think that our core operating structure allows us to do a lot of it through our corporate office in Scottsdale, whether it's in another market or not. We tested Lake Havasu. We have a luxury property in Lake Havasu that was kind of a test for us. It was like our beta test for other markets, because at the end of the day, it may as well be another state. It's 3.5 hours to get there. It's not like we can just run over there real quick to handle an issue. So that was kind of our first test, and it's gone awesome. I could fly to San Diego faster than I could drive to Havasu. So it's looking at some other markets. It was all about the financial aspect of the cross seasonality. That was the biggest deciding factor for us. We're not trying to be the next big Hofstra. We're not trying to be the next Evolve. We're not trying to be any of that, but we do want to continue to grow and want to do it responsibly so that we're not seeing these huge ebbs and flows of seasonality by kind of confining ourselves to one market. And so it came down almost 100% to the financials of it. Being in other markets for the summers is busy, made sense so that we have a more consistent revenue stream year round rather than having to buckle up for summer and get ready for the down season. We don't want to have any down season. So
bring that seasonality out. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense strategically. Just broadly speaking, Rick, what are things now from having done this for so long that you wish you knew when you were first deciding that this was going to be a business and you were going to go full time at it? Like, what are the things that you wish you knew when you first were getting started about this business of property management?
Oh man, I mean, that's a long list. There's a lot of things. I mean, there's always been tech. Tech's one of the things that we lean heavily on now that we didn't really before. I mean, there's a certain level of humbleness that I wish I would have had in the beginning when it comes to obviously reaching out to, I didn't have a mentor. I mentor other people now. I wish that I would have at least gone through the process a little bit more, reaching out to people who have been successful ahead of me. That's probably one of the biggest things. I mean, patience is one of the things I wish I had more of in the beginning. That's something that I've had to learn as we grow, and knowing that that instant gratification of this industry, it's probably gone for a while just based on the industry as a whole. I think those are probably the main things. We're relying a little bit more on tech. We try to do everything ourselves. I mean, I was an old school spreadsheet Excel kind of guy when it came to financials. And like I said, I mean, obviously transparency, you have experience. It's one of the things you gain through experience. But if somebody would have told me from the very beginning, there's no reason to pull any punches. You need to say exactly what it is up front rather than sugarcoat it. We're onboarding 2 clients right now that were just sold a bag of goods by another management company. Hey, your property is going to do this. We can't guarantee it, but this is what it's going to do. When it fell far short of that because of some very bad procedural issues, there's no reason for that. It's like and there was times when I found myself probably sugarcoating it a little bit more and realizing that somebody else is out there probably doing exactly that. But just being transparent, I wish somebody would have said, hey, it's better to not have a client at all than have a client with unrealistic expectations based on your consultation. And that's probably the biggest thing. It's just looking at it from every side and just basically saying, hey, this is the reality of the situation. This is what the real expectation is. And I found that I'm more conservative than probably most when it comes to that. I would way rather overperform my estimates than vastly underperform, because that just makes friction from the beginning. So there's relying a little bit more on tech, obviously having a little bit more patience and transparency in the beginning, and then leaning on somebody with the experience are probably the main things that I would have changed if I could go back and do it over again.
No, those are great points. And looking ahead, Rick, I mean, there's the expansion component that was just mentioned. Any other big sort of strategic thoughts you have in mind as far as you mentioned mergers? Is the M&A game something you're looking into at all?
Yeah.
What's ahead?
I mean, it's the sky's kind of the limit at this point. We have been we've been approached a handful of times twice by Vacasa, a couple others, and we watch. I mean, there's deals that are happening here in Arizona. I mean, there's a big one that happened a year and a half ago where companies are getting bought out and going through that process of negotiating buyouts and things like that kind of gave us the interest. And we're not trying to grow this thing to the nth degree tomorrow and find an exit. We really are passionate about what we do, but at the same time, we want to grow and grow strategically to the point where we are a brand that people recognize, whether it's in Arizona or San Diego or St. Petersburg or anywhere, but a brand that they recognize for the right reasons, not because we have the most properties like Vacasa. I wouldn't want to be recognized like a Vacasa who's slowly deteriorating into nothing. But be a brand that people recognize for the hospitality aspect. When we changed our name to Travli Hospitality, we were very much came from my time I spent some time on the board here for the Scottsdale, a couple of the Scottsdale advocacy groups. I know John Hildebrand really well. He's a colleague of mine that we bounce information off each other a lot. Spending some time on the advocacy groups and listening to the way that in not just investors, but politicians and legislators and things like that, listening to the way that they kind of talk about STRs. So that's what they are. They're Airbnbs or STRs. And people forget, I think, and it's easy to do so, that these are vacation rentals first. VRBO is the first of the game. These are vacation rentals. And at the end of the day, we're talking about people's vacations. We're not talking purely about dollars and cents or assets or real estate or investments or anything. At the end of the day, it's purely about what you bring to the table from a hospitality perspective. And so the reason and probably the motivation for expansion and bringing more smaller companies under our umbrella is to just build that brand as a whole. We would love to be recognized as kind of the industry leader when it comes to the hospitality aspect of the short-term rental industry in Arizona and anywhere else that we operate. And that's really the goal at the end of the day, is not to just stack doors, but build our company and our brand simultaneously on our portfolio in a quality manner that people will reflect on as, a hospitality-based business. Something that we're exceeding people's expectations when they come wherever we are on vacation, and they come to us first.
What was that mindset shift that you also had to go through from like when you did the rebranding to Travli Hospitality? Was it like, okay, we're becoming a hospitality company now? It's kind of like
100%. Yeah, I mean, we fell into the same trap as a lot of people. I mean, admittedly, it was more about you get to a certain point when it really clicks. Like whatever your goals are from a revenue perspective, maybe it's $1 million, maybe it's $5 million, maybe it's $10 million. You get to a certain point where you're chasing whatever your goals are. And it was a monetary goal for us. There was a certain point where we wanted to obviously set our families up for long-term success from a financial aspect. And we got blinded by the same thing, dealing with investors and helping them secure assets, Airbnbs, whatever it is. And we fell into the same trap as everybody else. COVID was one of those things where it was just kind of that gold rush. We call it the fool's gold in our office of the industry, because everything just worked. Everybody was making money. It was relatively easy. Investors were coming like crazy. Clients were knocking on our door. We didn't have to do any marketing. We had to do nothing. We were onboarding a ton of properties, and we got caught up in it just like everybody else, stacking doors and making money. And then my time on the advocacy part of it was listening to people like myself. I mean, admittedly, like myself, that were just like, hey, and hearing from the opposition, as far as no one cares about anything. It's just about money. And everybody fell into that trap, including us. But then we were like, wait a second, we really need to refocus and understand that if we're going to be successful long-term, if we're going to be fighting the good fight with legislatures and neighbors and all of these things while simultaneously trying to grow a brand, we were going to have to refocus. Hospitality is the focus. At the end of the day, if you don't have satisfied guests, you don't have a business. And so, yeah, we shifted. I mean, there's just too many Airbnbs. I mean, there's thousands. It's grown to a ridiculous level in Scottsdale alone. And if you don't set yourself apart, you have no chance. Anybody can automate their check-in instructions and send out codes for your doors and send out Wi-Fi information, but it's taking it to another level, making restaurant recommendations or asking them if they need golf club rentals or just anything, taking the hospitality side of it, taking kind of that concierge mindset of a 5-star hotel, implementing that into the way you deal with your customers. It doesn't matter if it's $65 a night casita that we rent or a $5.5 million mansion that we rent. People want to be treated like this is their vacation and you care. And that was the biggest thing. We knew in order to grow, be successful, and be an industry leader, especially in this market, Scottsdale, we were going to have to refocus on the hospitality side. And that's what we've done wholeheartedly. Every aspect of our business is built on guest satisfaction and hospitality. And that's what's made us successful more so lately than ever before, is because while everybody's out stacking doors and signing clients, we're very much selective. on the types of clients that we work with, the types of properties that we host, but also on the services that we offer. We don't skimp in a lot of areas. And if it was just dollars and cents, we would. We'd have offshore virtual assistants and chatbots and all of these things. But we've subscribed to the people helping people kind of aspect. And that doesn't come cheap. And so we've invested in the hospitality side, so that if you call, you're talking to a person that cares, a person that's here, a person that understands, rather than some automated virtual assistant overseas that has no idea what you're dealing with. And that's been a big component in where we're at.
That's huge, Rick. This has been great, and believe me, I could have you here for hours.
Right.
But no, I wanted to thank you for your time. I think you've been very, very generous with your insights, and I think, yeah, man, I think there's a couple of very solid, practical, golden nuggets here for people to take home. So thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you at the next conferences and to continue to.
Oh yeah, the RMA is in our backyard.
Journey. Exactly. We'll
Absolutely.
be there for sure. We'll be there. Awesome, Rick. Well, thank you so much for
having
taking
me.
the time, man. We'll see each other.
I appreciate it. Yes,
All right.
sounds good.